I attended a hands-on event for the Blood of Dawnwalker a few weeks ago and was able to play uninterrupted for, I'd say, just over 4.5 hours, starting from the very beginning of the game. And this got me through the prologue and just a little bit out into the open world. And while I did experience a lot, we were not able to record at this event, so don't expect much when it comes to visual presentation for this video. Chapter markers below. And let's start right off talking about combat, which offers a decent amount of options. So even if you're someone who doesn't like directional combat or combat systems with learning curves in general, I'd say stick around as there still may be options for you. So Dawnwalker uses a stamina-based combat system where dodging, blocking, and attacking all consume stamina, which will regenerate slowly on its own, but if you don't pay attention in combat, you will find yourself draining that stamina bar to 0, which will cause Cohen to enter this brief exhausted-like state, which will leave him quite vulnerable. Now, the catch with the stamina system is that the player is rewarded with precise timing, such as pulling off what the game calls a perfect block, which will give you a chunk of stamina back. And a perfect block in Dawnwalker is essentially similar to a parry in other games, with the addition of requiring the player to get the direction of the block correct. And there was also a perfect dodge, which allowed you to dodge without consuming any stamina. You just had to get the timing right. When attacking in this game, ideally you're observing where your opponent is the least protected. For example, if they have their sword up, you'll want to attack low, or perhaps left or right, as this will give you the best chance of actually landing attacks, and possibly staggering them a bit to land consecutive hits. When an opponent is attacking you, ideally you're observing the direction that they're attacking from, and then blocking in that same direction. And the directional indicator that you see over each character in combat will help you do this. You don't have to just look at their animations. Now, the reason why I keep saying ideally here is that you don't necessarily have to fully engage with this system, and we'll talk more about that here momentarily. Blocking opponents in this game from the correct direction without pulling off the riskier perfect block with the timing and direction consumes no stamina. So you can basically hold down the block button and just focus on getting the correct directional inputs. And this is, of course, easier than a perfect block, but you also don't get the added benefit of gaining stamina back. Now, with all that said, you actually don't have to use the directional mechanics. You can just simply press the attack button, with the catch being that Cohen will attack in a random attack pattern. This is similar to how most other games actually work. But these omnidirectional attacks will actually cost you a little bit more stamina. So yeah, it may be easier for some of you, but it also may offer some challenge in a different area at the same time. Your opponent will also be able to block your attacks. You just don't necessarily know when they're going to, because you're not trying to really fool them. You're more so playing a stamina game here. I spent most of my playtime using directional combat, but I did try omnidirectional a few times where I just wanted to finish an opponent off, and it seemed to work fine. But I can't really speak on it too much and whether or not it's going to be a good combat system for those of you guys that don't use directional. I'll have to talk about that in my full review. What do we have here? Now, on top of that, for those of you that hate directional combat, there's also an option that you can toggle on and off that's called auto block. And from my limited understanding, I believe this allows you to block incoming attacks without the need to do directional blocks, but at the cost of stamina. So you can't just hold down the block button endlessly. And then, of course, alongside the stamina and directional systems, Cohen will also have special abilities that he can use. Abilities that you'll gain as you progress through the game and find manuals and invest into certain perks and so on. More on that later in the video, but these abilities do have their own cooldowns, and they work off of a system. I don't know what it's officially called, but I'm going to call it the charge system. And what this means is that there are different abilities that require different amounts of charges to activate. In this gameplay clip right here, you can see that Cohen has 1 charge out of 4 ready to go, and charges will slowly build up on their own in combat, but will also gain boosts when you land hits and do successful blocks and so on. So the game does encourage active gameplay. On top of everything that I just talked about, Dawnwalker also offers 4 different base difficulty settings that can make combat easier or more difficult for you. Story difficulty makes enemies weaker and slower, and it also gives 𝑐𝑙𝑝𝑠 more stamina. Fair difficulty is the default difficulty. Challenging makes enemies hit harder and become more aggressive while also reducing some of 𝑐𝑙𝑝𝑠's stamina. And the duelist difficulty reduces enemy HP, but has them hitting harder and becoming more aggressive than they were even on challenging. And 𝑐𝑙𝑝𝑠 will also have much less stamina, and there are no directional indicators in combat, meaning that you, the player, have to actually observe your opponent's animations to determine what direction that they're attacking and blocking from. Now, turning off the directional indicators is also an individual setting that you can toggle on and off, regardless of difficulty. And I did give this a try, and I actually think I enjoyed having it off more than having it on. And then, believe it or not, there's even more difficulty settings that you can tweak that will further affect enemy HP, 𝑐𝑙𝑝𝑠 stamina, and even enemy attack speed and attack patterns. So even if you're not into directional combat, or if you want to give it a try, you just feel like you're going to suck at it, there's a lot of different options here to hopefully find something that better suits you so you can enjoy your time. My time playing was spent on the default fair difficulty. I gotta say, it was actually quite challenging, but I think a big part of the challenge was, being new to this system and trying to get the muscle memory down, as it is quite different from most other games, including Kingdom Come Deliverance, which also has directional combat, first person though. It took me, I'd say, until the end of my session, like hour 3 and 4, to start feeling more comfortable and also more confident. And while some people will experience that as a negative, for myself, it was actually quite a big positive, as I really enjoy games that do have learning curves. And because I could actually feel myself as a player improving alongside 𝑐𝑙𝑝𝑠 improving as I leveled up and invested into perks, I'd say that was actually quite satisfying. Now, there were a few times where I felt like things might be a little bit too awkward. Some of the button prompts and also the camera at times felt like it was swinging around like a madman, even when I was just simply soft locking onto opponents. And I think some people will be frustrated by a few of these things if they don't get ironed out. Is it the best combat I've ever experienced? No, but in my limited time, I very much enjoyed it. But be prepared for something quite different than what many of you may be used to. And let's now transition into character progression, and then I'll get into the ever so important topics of quests, choice consequence, and the game's time mechanics. Do note that I'll also be putting out a more detailed video on the skill trees. Maybe it's already out for some of you. In Dawnwalker, you gain XP and you level up by killing things and completing quests, and there may also be a few more ways that I'm just unaware of or didn't notice. And once you level up, you are rewarded with skill points. I can't remember how many you get per level, if it's only one or multiple, but either way, in order to invest your skill points into perks, you have to actually travel to or find a shrine on the map. And in a way, you could look at this as similar to doing a long rest in BG3 in order to level up and get your skills and all that good stuff. From my experience, the shrines do appear to be fairly numerous and easy to find. And also note that shrines can be used as fast travel points, they can be used as storage, and used to actually pass some in-game time. Also very important to note, all the perks require skill points to invest into, and you can put more points into a single perk to make it more powerful. But there's also several perks, many of them, that actually require you to give up a valuable resource in the game, time segments, sometimes multiple. Which in this game, when you use up time segments for quests or perks or whatever, this essentially moves the day forward a bit. But if that confuses you, just stick around for the next section, as I'll get much more into the time mechanics. The skill trees are divided into 3 categories: witchcraft, sword mastery, and vampirism. Witchcraft is heavily focused on 𝑐𝑙𝑝𝑠's magic that he can only use in his daytime human form. And in this skill tree, you can invest into perks that give you all sorts of stat boosts when using witchcraft abilities, such as armor boosts, damage boosts, cooldown reductions on the witchcraft abilities, and so on. I do note that there are a few perks that can actually benefit 𝑐𝑙𝑝𝑠 in all of his forms, so not just daytime magic, such as perks that will increase the yield that you'll get from foraging plants, and there's also some consumable focused perks as well. Over on the right side of the witchcraft skill tree here, we have our witchcraft abilities that you can invest into, such as Burning Blood, which is a damage over time ability that basically causes your opponent's blood to burn, and Ravenous Flock, which is an area attack and a stun that basically shoots out magical ravens or something like that. And interestingly enough, there's also a more utility-based witchcraft ability that lets you speak with the dead. You'll notice that the majority of witchcraft abilities have a little book icon in the bottom right, and this indicates that while you can invest multiple perk points into these abilities, you'll first have to find a manual to unlock the ability. So you can't just straight up invest into them. You have to get that manual first. And on the very bottom of the skill tree here, you'll notice 3 ultimate perks, of which you can only learn 1. There's an ability that lets you target 2 enemies for your first ability used in combat. There's a magical shield that auto blocks some attacks, and a more passive ultimate that makes it so that each ability that you use will reduce the cost of the next ability. Sword mastery skills can benefit Cohen in the day with his human form or at night in his vampiric form, as you can use a sword at any time. There's perks in this skill tree that will boost your damage or crit, boost your health, give you some more activation charges for your abilities. There's perks that will weaken enemies on successful perfect blocks, and so on. The Swordmaster abilities are over on the right here, and you can see that, like the Witchcraft abilities, these also require that you find the manual for the ability in order to unlock the ability. I believe that some NPCs can also teach you a few of these abilities as well. You don't always necessarily have to find or buy the manual. Not 100% sure though. An example of a few Swordmaster abilities here include a Broad Swing, which is of course good AoE damage. There's a Charge ability, and an ability that restores a portion of an activation charge when you land a perfect block. For Swordmaster ultimates, we have Last Stand, which substantially increases your damage output when you reach low HP levels. There's an ultimate that resets all your ability cooldowns, and there's one that does something with your activation charges when you're using abilities. And the Vampirism skill tree is heavily focused on Cohen's nighttime vampiric form. And there are perks here that will boost your vampire abilities, ones that will focus on boosting your claw attacks, as when you're in Cohen's nighttime vampiric form, you can use your claws or you can pull out a sword. There's HP increases when drinking blood, stuff like that. To the right, we once again have active abilities that we can unlock or obtain and further invest into, but you'll notice that there's no book icon for the vampire abilities. Instead, the abilities have either a vampire teeth icon, which requires you to drink vampire blood to unlock. Don't fully know how that works mechanics-wise, but it sounds pretty cool. And then there's the skull icon. And these are abilities that you have to level up your corruption level in order to unlock. And corruption in Dawnwalker is basically a long-term progression mechanic that deals with how much you give into your vampire ways, such as drinking human blood being a great way to increase your corruption levels. A few of the vampirism abilities include Voracious Bite, which restores HP and deals damage. There's a slow time ability, a mind control ability, a bleed attack that's called Shred, and a few more. I'm going to go into the details of all of these the best that I can in the next video. The vampirism alts include Nourishing Blood, which makes it so drinking blood will restore more HP. Crimson Feast will grant damage and crit buffs from drinking human blood. Wild Blood will grant activation charge restoration from drinking animal blood. And Hastened Corruption will make your corruption fill up faster. Also, part of character progression in this game is finding new gear and weapons, and this wasn't really a huge part of my prologue experience, so I can't speak on it too much, but fellow content creator Sarth told me that he found a legendary sword not long after getting out of the prologue, which was certainly exciting to hear about because different gear has different rarity levels and power levels, of course. If I remember correctly, you won't actually be finding maces or axes or anything like that. Dawnwalker focuses on swords, of which I believe there's short swords, long swords, and great swords. I think those 3 types of swords have been confirmed. And then, of course, you also have your vampire claws and, of course, magic in the daytime. Each of those sword types is said to feel different from one another and affect your attack speed, but I think I just had a long sword for the entire prologue, so I can't really speak on too much here. Do note that I learned that you will be able to prepare separate presets of equipment for your human and vampire form, And then the quick slots, which are where your active abilities are slotted onto different buttons, is also part of this preset thing and will basically auto change depending on whether it's daytime or nighttime. As for Cohen's character stats, at the bottom of the inventory screen, I noticed stat numbers for health, stamina, weapon crit, armor, weapon damage, and claw crit. I don't recall leveling up any individual attributes in this game. I believe it's more so the perks that you invest into and the gear that you wear that determine your stat numbers. I'm also not sure if when you level up, if it auto increases any of these stats or not. I didn't fully pay attention to that. Overall, I'd say I enjoyed the few abilities I was able to use, but I didn't play long enough to engage with the skill trees in any meaningful way. With that said, I like what I experienced. Is it the most amazing skill trees I've ever seen? No, but they look fun enough to engage with, and I really like how you can lean more into Cohen's daytime or his nighttime vampiric form. And I like how you also have to find manuals to learn abilities, as that encourages exploration and also interacting with NPCs. The biggest surprise here was learning that investing into several perks does cost time. And since you only have 30 days and 30 nights to rescue your family, time is quite the valuable resource. And my first impression is that that may be a little bit too punishing. I'd rather that time be solely connected to questing. But I understand the idea. Power comes at the cost of time. Now, whether that's well balanced remains to be seen, and maybe it won't be an issue at all. But if you go all in power, is it possible that you could end up missing out on a lot of the game's content on your first playthrough? Like, how much of that content? I'm not entirely sure. A lot of this still has to be tested.
Thank you for not smacking me.
Don't speak too soon.
Now let's talk about questing, which naturally ties into choices, consequences, and Dawnwalker's time mechanics. Like I mentioned earlier, most of my time was spent in the prologue of the game, which takes place in a small section of the overall map. It's kind of like a mini open world zone for the prologue. While I think it is meant to represent the game as a whole, I can't say that for certain. There's going to be some prologue spoilers ahead because it's really the best way to explain what Dawnwalker is all about. I'll save the biggest spoiler for the end of this section and let you know ahead of time so you can skip it if you want, but it's still just prologue related. So early on, Cohen's father will ask him to visit the local herbalist or alchemist named Anka, who is an important character and, I believe, potential romance option in the game. Cohen's mother is gravely ill, and with the evening blood mass approaching, where citizens basically have to pay a blood tax to the vampire overlords, Cohen's father fears that his wife and Cohen's mother will be executed for appearing too weak. That seems like a pretty important quest, right? To help out your mother, get her in better condition. Well, I completely ignored it intentionally. So the prologue introduces the game's time mechanics, which is separate from the 30 days and 30 night system, but it works in a similar way. You basically have 8 daytime segments and 8 nighttime segments, and certain quests, upgrades, and some of the skill trees, and there's even some other things in the game that will consume one or more time segments, but time will never move on its own. Very important to note that. You will always know exactly what an action will cost. And what that means is exploring, generally speaking, never really felt stressful, or I didn't feel pressure when I was just out doing random things. I could wander around without worrying about the clock. Questing, however, overall was a different story here. Many quests in this game do consume time. For example, I met my siblings who asked me to walk them to the river, and that cost 1 time segment. Along the way, I could also play tag with my siblings and also help bait their fishing poles at the river, both completely optional, but I chose to do them, bringing my total to 3 segments right out the gate, basically very early on in the prologue, not really caring much about my mother, right? Towards the end of that quest, I also want to point out that I met 2 vampire soldiers. They're not vampires, but they're soldiers for the vampire overlords. And one of them included a Uriashi, which is like this giant folk in the lore. I avoided fighting them, which was an option in the dialogue, but later on in the dialogue, the game let me roleplay being openly distrustful of the Uriashi, despite the Uriashi seeming like a fairly reasonable fella. It might sound a little odd, but I genuinely appreciated that option to be almost a little bit racist here, as humans in the Val have spent generations fearing and fighting the Uriashi, so having that reflected in dialogue, I would say made the world feel quite authentic rather than being sanitized and being scared to allow a player to distrust another fantasy race. Ooh, we don't want to do that in our games these days, right? Well, Dawnwalker doesn't appear to care about that. It appears to be more authentic. And what I really appreciated was that it does seem like over time in the game, I am going to be able to learn more about the Uriashi and perhaps change my perspective. You know, I'm RPing initially someone who is like most in the Val. You fear the Uriashi, and the Uriashi probably have their own views on humans as well. But over time, you might learn why these feelings have occurred and that maybe it's not necessarily all based in truth. And I think the possibility of that means good writing, and I liked it. After that occurred, I continued being an absolute terrible son. I picked a fight with another guy who actually was kind of picking on me, actually, chased him down, and then happily agreed to beat him. This was his father's idea. After I already had kicked his ass in the first place. I think this quest overall cost me 2 time segments in total. I then completed a couple more quests, including finding a lost pig and helping the butcher slaughter the pig, where I was even given role-playing choices for how to actually slaughter the pig. Not sure how that affects gameplay overall, but I did appreciate the roleplay options. And then I helped a woman recover a stolen banner, which led to one of my favorite moral choices, you could say. So the banner belonged to the vampire overlords, and a local man had stolen it because he refuses to allow any of the citizens to basically submit to the vampires. While the woman only wanted it back because she basically feared what would happen to her or perhaps her family if she disobeyed. She was the one that's supposed to put up the banner. So the rebel man here had good intentions. He wanted to rebel against the vampire overlords, but he also had very little to lose, as it appeared as if he didn't have family or friends or anything like that. And the woman likely wanted to resist as well, but she had a family depending on her, and is it really worth just not putting up a single banner to be ripped to shreds and have your family ripped to shreds and perhaps the entire village just murdered? So the game presented me with this choice of, do you return the banner or do you stay quiet here? It is a relatively small quest, I would assume, but I genuinely struggled with this decision. I really like the moral ambiguity, and, you know, hopefully that's something that we'll see continue throughout the rest of the game. Now, because every time cost was clearly communicated to me as the player, I did, for the most part, always feel in control. I wasn't worried about accidentally running out the clock. If I failed my mother, it was because I deliberately chose to spend my time elsewhere. It wasn't really going to be a surprise. Now, while exploring, I also discovered an abandoned hut, and I was able to use some Witcher-like senses, very much Witcher 3 when you see it, of course, to find, I don't know, a note in a chest or something like that. And this note actually unlocked another quest, so a secret quest in a way, that I'll be able to work on later on in the game. I didn't actually get to work on it, but it was something to do after the prologue in the city of 𝑠varttrau. Now, finding hidden locations in this secretive quest didn't consume any time at all, which certainly encouraged the continuation of exploration. It didn't feel like you had to, weigh whether or not you should explore and take your time in the world. Eventually, I did spend my final time segment, and this triggered the evening blood mass. Daytime was over. And up to that point, I had intentionally left my mother's quest unfinished, of course. I didn't talk to Anka at all. I ignored another quest that involved a missing brother, and I also apparently missed a few quests entirely as I talked to a few other players, and I also saw some other gameplay that I didn't experience in the prologue. Some of these quests, from what I understand, can be completed later in this game. Just because a day passes, it doesn't mean all your quests are going to fail. But this isn't necessarily true for every single one of them, as this is a living, breathing world. For example, the missing brother quest, I don't believe the brother stays missing forever. I think he actually died. Now, at the Blood Mass itself, which started off with an awesome cinematic, I'll talk more about that momentarily, several of my earlier choices were acknowledged by NPCs in the church, and little banter or NPC dialogue. It showed that quest outcomes actually at least meant something up to this point. The man that was searching for his brother, I believe he either said his brother died or he acknowledged that I didn't help him find his brother, one of the two. And Cohen's father was there, of course, and he wasn't exactly thrilled with how I'd spent my day. And now on to the final prologue spoiler, what happens at the Blood Mass. I'll give you a chance to actually skip to the next chapter marker if you don't want to hear this. But this is kind of what the whole prologue comes to. And if this can be replicated in the game as a whole, I think we could have quite the interesting choice consequence type game. But let's get into it. So, as expected, my mother arrived at the Blood Mass feeling quite ill and looking very weak. And the vampire overlords brutally killed her. I think they just shredded her apart. It was actually quite crazy and intense and unexpected. I appreciated it though. I ended up speaking with two other creators at the event. Neither of them ignored the quest like I did. There's actually some good people out there in the world, but only one of them managed to actually save her, as apparently it's still possible to fail this quest even if you attempt it, as I believe there's some sort of alchemy mixing process that you have to do when you're making your mother's medicinal potion or whatever it is with the character Anka. And if you mess that mixture up, your mother ends up not getting something that actually helps her. But either way, your mother can survive or she can be ripped to shreds, and how much that changes the overall story remains to be seen. But from a role-playing perspective, it feels like a pretty meaningful consequence, and I'd imagine that players who save her will have additional interactions with her later in the game. Just the cutscene alone, though, the reactivity to my choices that I made in the prologue, seeing my mother being brutally killed, this was choice consequence just in terms of visual presentation alone, in a way that felt pretty awesome for a video game. So great to see that. So overall, the way that questing worked and how the time mechanics heavily tie into it, for the most part, as not every single quest is tied to time, I personally really enjoyed it. I do think that some players are going to struggle hard, though, with having to, at times, leave some quests unresolved or having a few of them fail here and there due to time changing. But you got to just come into the game expecting that. Don't expect your traditional feeling RPG. You got to embrace it. The time mechanics are a big part of this game, and there's no way around that. Embrace it. Moving on to the game's tone, writing, and characters, which I did briefly touch on in the previous section, but let's talk about it in its own section. So from my experience, this game can be quite dark and somber, and generally speaking, this is how I like most of my RPGs. You have darkness taking over, but there's also a possible light at the end of the tunnel, which gives you that motivation to do what you need to do in the game to engage with it, change things, make things better. And many of the characters that I spoke to were very authentic feeling, real. There was no Disneyfication going on in this game or Marvel-like dialogue from what I remember. Most of the characters in this game know the situation that they're in, and it's pretty dire, and the tone of the game and the voice acting, etc., all do a really good job at portraying those emotions onto the player. The cinematics that I experienced were fantastic, but do note that for some gameplay dialogue cinematics, some of the face animations can be a little bit on the stiff side. Didn't really bother me much, but it is something that I did take note of. But it was all overall very, very enjoyable, whether it's an actual cinematic or more of a dialogue type cinematic. Now, the game has no fear of blood or gore, as many of you probably already know from the first trailer. And the vampire overlords were just awesome characters.
Come semus desperati, spem nobis dedisti.
During the prologue's Blood Mass, when the vampire overlords first come into the chapel, it was very, very intense. It was suspenseful. It was emotional because you have your mother there in whatever state she's in because of your chosen actions in the prologue. And I was just kind of sitting there in awe when they all walked in. But at the same time, I had to keep reminding myself that the blood mass is probably not a good thing, even though I was loving the scene. My poor mother could end up being ripped to shreds, right? Brensis is the game's main antagonist, the vampire overlord, you could say, the one who rules over the other three. And so far, he seems like an incredibly well-written character, a true villain he appears to be. But all four of the vampire lords do have their own unique personalities and backstories, and I, for one, very much look forward to diving deeper into each and every one of them by finding lore in the game. And then, of course, there's all the characters that you'll meet in Cohen's town and in the open world, even though I didn't get to experience that too much. But all these characters have different views on what's going on, and some of them want to rebel and start rebellions and want you to be part of it. And this is where your choice comes in to consider forming alliances or not involving yourself with those alliances. And all this is, in my opinion, so far presented in a way that's quite well written with interesting characters. And like I said, no Disneyfication going on here. It feels authentic, dark, and real. And it's one of the highlights of this game so far for myself. The choice consequence, obviously, but the writing and the tone. Those are the two things that really, really stand out as potentially AAA, as the price tag suggests, while many other things in the game might feel a little bit more on the AA side. But if those two aspects are great, I can be 100% on board with this game. Now, as far as crafting goes in the game, I think it's largely focused around consumables, but I am having kind of a hard time remembering this aspect of the game. I do recall picking up various plants on the ground, one of which was an epic ingredient that was called Tainted Marrow, which gives a plus 100% heal while in 𝑔𝑎𝑚𝑒 form, which is your vampire form. And I did think it was pretty cool to see different rarity of gatherables. And I also wrote down that you can craft right from your inventory, and that the different consumable categories were health, stamina, enhanced melee, utilities, and enhanced active abilities. You do actually have to find recipes in this game in order to unlock certain consumables to be crafted, which does incentivize exploration, as I did find a few recipes when I was just out and about. Cohen, in his human daytime form, can heal by eating food, but actually using crafted consumables like potions will be much more powerful. I don't really have much of an opinion on the overall system, but as of now, I'm happy that it's there, and it does appear to be quite useful to engage with. And now let's briefly talk about the general gameplay feel, just running around, jumping, engaging with the environment, and so on. Overall, I'd say it's not bad, but it's also not exactly great either. A few things feel a little on the janky side, you could say, something that doesn't bother me much as I love Eurojank in games. But for a $70 game, I was hoping that some of this would feel a little better. Some of the movement and animations can be a little janky, and like in The Witcher 3 and also Crimson Desert, when your character moves and then you let go to stop moving, there's going to be a bit of a forward momentum going on that may be a little bit frustrating to some of you. It didn't bother me, but just note that. When you jump in this game, you also lose control of your character the minute that your feet leave the ground. You can't change the direction of anything, which in some ways is realistic, but you also can't even turn your character's body, which felt like a little too gamey, like you're on rails when you jump in this game, which wasn't really the best feeling ever. I also recall when using Plane Shift, which is a vampiric traversal ability that allows you to walk up walls, there were a few times where I was getting quite frustrated trying to turn my character the right way to aim at a ledge that I wanted to climb over. It was just taking way too long to get it correct. I also noticed, and perhaps this was bugged for me, or maybe I just wasn't doing it right, when you pull out your weapons in this game, you lose the ability to crouch. And this just didn't feel right, as I'd be sneaking up to opponents in a non-ready state. I'd rather have my weapons out. It just feels like something you would do. It just kind of threw me off a little bit. I also want to mention that while this may not be a problem for most, I did find the UI of the game to be a little on the intrusive side with a few things. You have these white icons that, show full button prompts, for example. And to me, this all looks too computery and can take you a little bit out of the immersion of the world. I did notice afterwards that there are some settings that you can change to perhaps make this much better. It kind of boggles my mind at how ugly and computerized some things can look in video games that are meant to be highly immersive. I mean, overall, I don't mind the UI in this game, but just certain things like interacting with objects and quest marker type stuff. Just think of Crimson Desert. When you actually look for artifacts out in the open world, you use the light reflect mechanic with your sword and light is reflected back at you. So much more immersive than, a button showing up in your face. Now, while I focused more on the negatives in this section, the general gameplay feel was still good enough for me. It wasn't a bad feel by any stretch of the imagination, just like simply running around, the world was beautiful and it felt good. But I do worry a little bit that for the price of $70, some players are going to come into this game with higher expectations in this department. So let's bring this video to a close, but note that there's so many more aspects and systems in this game. I just didn't get to experience, all of them in my limited hands-on time. That was mostly spent in the prologue. We, of course, have the infamy system. We have romance in the game. We have the 30-day and 30-night time mechanic, or doing quests at day and night time. That's a whole system in this game as well. The devs said that after the 30-day and 30 nights completes and you either save your family or you don't, you can actually still keep playing the game. We don't really know much about the world state after that. There's forming alliances with NPCs to help you defeat the vampire lords. Like, can you actually take the side of some of the vampire lords in some cases? You have your scouting towers, all sorts of open world activities, and just so much more. Overall, I gotta say, I very much enjoyed my time with Dawnwalker, and I very much feel like this is a game for me, and probably some of you as well if you watch my channel. It's a dark, gritty game, fantastic characters with good writing. There's a great villain setup, great atmosphere and overall visuals. There's harsh decisions that you're going to have to make as a player, interesting lore, a learning curve to the combat if you choose to engage with the default form of the combat. And perhaps most importantly, the sandbox narrative elements, at least from the way the prologue sets up the game. It really has you believing that the game as a whole is going to offer quite the reactive experience where no two players are going to experience the game in the same way. There's a lot of freedom that you, the player, have in where to go, when to go, and what to focus on. And at the hands-on event, there's not a single person that I talked to that played the prologue the same way that I did. And that's really what RPGs are all about, in my opinion. The game's time mechanic system is very interesting to me, and the devs do have a vision here, and I'm happy that they are sticking with it. It's nice to have something a bit different for once, but I do feel like some players are just not going to vibe with it, and there's a few aspects of the time mechanics that I'm even not fully convinced of yet, such as being undecided on how I feel about perk investment, costing time in many cases. But also, fellow content creator Neon Knight told me that he found a treasure under a bridge or something like that, but in order to get the treasure, it would cost him a time segment or something like that. And that seems super harsh and not really that fun to engage with. With that said, in my exploration, I didn't encounter anything like that. I picked up plenty of things that didn't have time costs associated with them. And for the most part, general exploration did feel more like a game such as The Witcher 3 versus a pure time mechanic game. Now, where I think the game could use some improvements is the general gameplay feel, even general combat feel in some cases, as it does feel a little bit on the janky side, which is perfectly fine for a player like myself, but like I've said before, the price tag of $70, I think players are going to come into this game with different expectations that may not be fully met in every category. I do also worry a little bit about performance. While overall it was good for me and others that were playing on the PCs that we were using, whatever they were, there were still a few stutters here and there, and it makes me wonder how the game will be on average PCs and consoles. If I had to take a guess, I feel like Dawnwalker is going to be a hit for many RPG enthusiasts out there, and many of you on my channel, especially many of you that come from more old school RPGs that don't mind a little bit of jank here and there and some learning curve. But due to the jankiness and the more hardcore systems like the time mechanic in this game, I don't really know if it has a chance of being a breakout hit for general gamers, With that said, perhaps Rebel Wolves are not really looking for some huge, crazy mainstream success here. Maybe they're just looking for enough success to be able to continue on the saga, as we do know that they currently have plans of hopefully doing more games in the future with returning characters in different time periods. Overall, though, I'm definitely pumped up for this game. Still my most anticipated of this year. And overall, if the game is able to expand on what I experienced in the earlier parts of the game, I think there's at least a chance of this one becoming my personal game of the year.